In 1920, the United States began the prohibition of alcohol, and we all know the results of that experiment. Bootleggers were running rampant, poorly distilled alcohol was being distributed, poisoning its consumers. The black market was thriving, and organized crime took over the distribution of alcohol, bringing an increase to violence. There are many parallels between this event and the current war on drugs. In 1971, Richard Nixon introduced the war on drugs as a way of deflecting attention from the war in Vietnam. Much like with Prohibition, on the surface, a war on illegal drugs seems like a good thing, protecting our citizens from the dangers of narcotics. This war on drugs, though, costs our country $20 billion annually, most of which is spent on keeping the drugs out of the country or seizing the drugs once they get here. When we look closer and examine the evidence, is the war on drugs effective? Do the results justify the cost? The answer to that question is a resounding no. The first evidence that the war on drugs isn't working, and really the only evidence that you should need, is that drug use hasn't gone down, it's gone up. In 1993, 16.4% of the population between the ages of 12 and 17 admitted to using illicit drugs. In 2001, that number had risen to 28.4%. If the drug war is to be effective, preventing children from using drugs should be its number one priority. Even if you take away age parameters, the results are the same. In 1993, 34.2% of the entire population admitted to using drugs. In 2001, that number was 41.7%. Not only are more people using drugs, but the quality of some of the drugs has declined steeply, and in some cases, so has the cost. In the 1970s, heroin cost $30 a bag and was 5% pure drug. Today, that same amount of heroin will cost you $4 on the street and be 80 to 90% pure. That's cheaper than a six-pack of beer. And it increases the dangers of overdose. On top of that, drugs are more readily available today than they ever were. Heroin and cocaine are available in nearly every city in America, whereas in the 70s, those things were usually only making a dent in big cities. So the drug war isn't helping keep drugs out of the country, nor out of the hands of its citizens. So what is it doing? It's putting users and distributors in prison. As of 2007, almost 20% of criminals locked up in state prisons in this country were there for drug offenses. That's 253,300 people. According to the American Corrections Association, the average cost to keep those people locked up per day, one person, is $67.55. That works out to a total of $6,245,301,475 per year. That's over $6 billion of state money per year to imprison people who are doing drugs, not harming anyone else, just themselves. This doesn't take into account the millions of people in the last 40 years who have been either imprisoned or killed due to violence taking place because of the black market for drugs in this country as well as in others. It's not so much organized crime anymore, but instead it's gone to street gangs. Legalization of drugs is a radical idea. I understand that. But some drugs are already legal. Alcohol is a drug that leads to 50,000 deaths per year. Yet it's readily available around the country to anyone over the age of 21. Tobacco, also a drug, one that's caused 440 deaths per year. I know listing the number of deaths isn't exactly great for my argument, but as we've seen with prohibition and with illegal drug use today, those that want to use will use. Consequences be damned. Why are these drugs legal? Two reasons. First, historically they've always been legal, and aside from that little blip with alcohol. And prohibiting them now would be just as foolish and damaging as prohibition was in 1920. Second, money. Alcohol and tobacco tax brings in more than $20 billion annually. $20 billion. Imagine the money we could make as a country if we taxed illegal drugs. Illegal drug trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar business, same as alcohol, same as tobacco. A heavy tax similar to that on cigarettes, combined with the elimination of the drug war and the release of non-violent drug criminals from prisons around the country, would immediately yield a minimum of $50 billion per year. $50 billion. Imagine what that kind of money could do for this country. The economy, the healthcare issue, the rising cost of tuition, Education expenses. The legalization and regulation of drug use would also increase the health of those unfortunate enough to suffer from addictions. With clean needles, the spread of HIV and hepatitis would be reduced, and there would be a decrease in the number of overdoses by policing the purity of the drug. Users would know exactly what they're getting. Obviously, we can't just legalize drugs and leave it at that. A shift in focus is what we need. There should be an increase in quality, free rehab clinics for those people hoping to kick their habit and move on with their life. We should also step up preventative measures with children, not just commercials running on TV, and not just a police officer coming in and talking to you one day in your entire school life about DARE, but educating them on the true dangers of drug use and the effect that it has on your body, as well as those who love you. Much like sex education and the distribution of condoms cut down on the spread of venereal diseases and HIV, this method of prevention can work if we focus our attention on it. And there will be plenty of money to institute these policies, to run the free clinics, and to do the prevention with children because of all the money coming in from taxing drugs. We say that we live in a free country where our citizens are permitted to live a life of their choosing so long as they don't impede on the rights of the citizens around them. Drug use falls under these freedoms. The ingestion of drugs, no matter what drug it may be, harms no person other than the user. Legalizing drugs won't make addicts out of all of us. That would mean that the only thing stopping me from picking up a crack rock on the way home tonight is the fact that it's illegal. What about my morals? And why did that not extend to marijuana, which I used frequently, to say the least, in high school in my early 20s, and still use recreationally today? In order to live in a truly free society, we need to legalize drugs in this country. Everyone, and I mean everyone, will reap the benefits. Thank you.